Welcome back. Episode 96 of the Grouch and the Brainstorm. I'm Mike, and I'm here with Matt.
What's happening?
And that's it. Just Mike and Matt.
That's it.
No Jill.
No Jill.
Jill is under the weather today.
This was recorded on a Friday. I think she got her check and just didn't show up. Man.
Oh, that
you know what I'm
be
saying?
I
Yeah.
have to check outside the studio because it is in Jill's house.
yeah.
No, it's actually not just me and Matt today. We have Wes and Kelly from Utah, and we are about to interview them. What do you think about that?
I think it's going to be real good, real interesting. I've talked to them previously a little bit, and they're really just a great sobriety couple, you know, and are doing the dang thing. So I'm excited.
Let's make haste. Let's get on. Hit it, Wes and Kelly.
Well, we are Weston and Kelly Clark. We live about an hour south of Salt Lake City, Utah. So we're over here in the mountains, in the beautiful Rocky Mountains. Just a little bit about us. We have been married for just under 3 years. We met in the rooms of recovery. Weston just got his 5 years in November, and I picked up my 8-year chip in November. So that's where we are as far as years are concerned. And we both have, really, I would say, similar stories in a lot of ways and different in some ways. It's interesting how higher powers work and bring us together. Really, our past has really become a strength in our relationship, and we're so appreciative of all of that. So I'll just share a little bit about my story and kind of how I got to what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now, I guess. For me, I'm pretty sure that I was born with whatever the addictive gene is that some people seem to have. I think of addiction or alcoholism as the disease of more. So if it changed the way I felt, even as a child, I wanted more of that. And that was true, first of all, with food, because it was the first thing I had access to. But as a teenager, I, expanded that to drugs and alcohol. And I just had this awful, sadistic voice that sort of showed up in my head that told me I wasn't valuable, I wasn't lovable, I wasn't worthy. And it seemed like everybody else around me was kind of going through life and doing just fine. But I describe it kind of like a monster living in my head that was like telling me and bullying me all day long, like, you're not good enough, you're not pretty enough, you're not skinny enough, there's something just wrong with you. And for some reason, that was just something that was with me and something for me to overcome. And so the way I dealt with that was really extreme behaviors really young, and then obviously picking up drugs and alcohol. My first experience with alcohol was like a spiritual experience, because once it hit my system, I still to this day can remember that feeling that hit me. Was like all of a sudden I was okay. And I felt like that voice in my head just shut up for a second. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is a solution, right? Yeah. And of course, it works at the beginning when you're 14 years old and you're, drinking, binge drinking with friends and stuff. The consequences aren't really, as bad as what can happen as time goes on. But I'm pretty sure that the phenomenon of craving that we talk about in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous, that was with me after my first time drinking. That craving, insatiable craving for alcohol and anything else that would get me out of my head, began for me. And of course that led to a lot of really reckless years. If my friends were wild, I was like 10, 15-fold. Like, my friends were pretty wild, and they were like, Kelly, you've got a problem. And I'm like 15 years old and, really just having no thought. It was sort of like my whole thought processes were broken. If it meant I could escape the way I felt, I was in 100%. It didn't matter how dangerous. It didn't matter about my personal dignity or anything. I was 100% trying to fill that big vacuum hole that seemed to be in my chest, and I was going to put anything and everything in it to stop. And it was just the survival mode for me for a long time. my journey brought me to really promiscuous behaviors. And I think that's, sex problems seem to come along with the journey for those of us who struggle with alcohol and drugs. And
Sure.
for me, yeah. And for me, that was just another one of those, hey, I had it confused in my head. These behaviors if someone gives me attention, if a man is giving me attention, if a man is willing to sleep with me, then somehow I'm valuable. So that was a crosswire for me. And that led to 3 childbirths that I placed 3 children for adoption young in my life because I was not obviously practicing protected sex. And so I would end up pregnant. I was able to pretty much white knuckle through those pregnancies, thank goodness, and had healthy children, but placed them all for adoption. So I think that voice in my head that told me I wasn't good enough used that as leverage against me.
How old were you at this time when this kind of as the consequences? I had that same thing with friends looking at me going, man, you're a little much. And I'm thinking, look who's telling me that. Like now I look back and go, oh my God, I should have listened. I've been there too. And, but I mean, how as the pregnancy started, what was your age? Kind of how was the...
17 was how I was old when I placed my first child. And then another one when I was still a teenager, and then another one as a young adult.
Gotcha.
When I look back, just like you, I look back at some of these situations, and even at times when I was homeless and other homeless, people are saying, Kelly, you've got a big problem. Yeah. I'm like, if I'm freaking out the homeless crowd,
yeah, they tell you need to get your crap together. It's like, oh, okay. I get it.
It's true. Oh, I have it, whatever that is, it is. And as far as willpower, I recognized I had no willpower pretty young. I recognized my own powerlessness, but I don't know that I equated it correctly in the steps. So my first exposure to the meetings, I was 14. So that would have been in 1989. Wow. And I showed up actually it was a CA meeting that my therapist said, here's this meeting at this building. It's CA, but I'm pretty sure you need this. And, and I had just started my career. And I show up there and I'm thinking, no, I'm not ready for this. I don't know what they're talking about. And this is they want to stop doing what's working for me. And so I'm not going to hang out here.
Yeah.
But at that time, I found a solution. That's what I thought. In my poor little brain, I was like, this is working. And so I stuck with it. I'm pretty stubborn. I stuck with it for a long time. But I did, over the years, step into the rooms and I could hear the message, but I couldn't get to the point where I think my biggest block for me was, you're not really talking about a higher power actually helping you with this problem, because I couldn't connect. I knew how out of control I was, and I knew that it was, or I felt, and I know a lot of us say this, but we feel so uniquely broken. I was pretty sure that what was wrong with me was I was somehow uniquely broken, and that God solution could not work for me. It was like trying to put my faith in Santa Claus or something, or the tooth fairy. And I was like, but I have real problems here on planet Earth, and I have no idea what you people are talking about. And I think I just, for so many years, wasn't ready. I was in, and it was my solution. And
I just thought about you sitting there at 14 in a CA meeting. I was 38 the first time I went to one, and they might as well have been speaking Chinese to me. And I was like, I don't know what this is. So how was that? Did somebody go with you? Did an adult?
It had to be a scary situation.
I believe so. What had happened was I had overdosed on all the pills in our house. I just had a bad day and decided I was going to take everything in our cabinet. And so I ended up in the emergency room, and they, said it was a suicide attempt. And it was just Kelly trying to get out of, her mind. And it was just kind of the reckless things I did at the time. And so they pumped my stomach and I was fine, but they put me in, it was inpatient at that point. So I was in an inpatient hospital, and this was in Walnut Creek, California, and it was part of John Muir Hospital. And so I was there, and then downstairs, we were upstairs being kids, and downstairs is where the the CA and other meetings came in. So they would have me go downstairs to
Gotcha.
join these meetings. Yeah,
Gotcha,
if that
okay.
makes some sense. So I remember it being very smoky. There was still smoking
Oh, yeah.
in the buildings, and it was a big meeting. It was one of those really big ones. And I think there was a part of me that was sort of like intrigued by these older people who had it figured out. Like they knew how to get drugs and they knew how to do these things. And right. I mean,
They
these
were
guys
pros.
were cool. They had long hair. They were pros. Like, I aspired to be like them, the using part, not the sober part.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's I can imagine at 14 sitting in any kind of meeting though. Like we still, like you said, you just weren't ready. It's kind of hard to be ready at 14, no matter what though, you know, to be fair.
Yeah, totally. Exactly. But it was interesting that they could see that in me already, that there was a therapist who said, this girl's already in trouble that way. And of course, other people see it sometimes long before we're ready to see it or acknowledge it. So yeah. So the years went on. I did get married, and I was married for 10 years. And as you can imagine, that was a disaster. I had 2 daughters in that marriage. This is the heartbreaking part of I feel the most heartbreak and grief in this part of my story, because I had these 2 amazing, beautiful daughters, and I was so determined to be a good mother to them. I was getting my turn after placing children for adoption. Here's my chance to be a mom.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, it's time to grow up. It's time to buckle down. Like, you got to get this under control. And I was so determined, and I'm a pretty determined person, but for the life of me, I couldn't figure it out. I mean, I would get I would get months of sobriety, but my mental health would spiral. And so in my 20s as a young mother, I developed a really severe cutting problem. And I have scars up and down both of my arms, pretty deep, those big scars. And because I could not stop attacking myself with razor blades when I wasn't coping with drugs and alcohol. So I'm like, well, what are my choices? I'm looking at this, like, I'm trying to function as a mom. When I'm sober, I'm falling apart mentally, and I'm blaming myself, and I'm in so much shame, not realizing that what is happening to me is I'm spiritually sick, and I am dealing with addiction and alcoholism. I mean, it was something happening to me that I needed that help. I couldn't see the solution yet. Mm-hmm. But those years were hard for my kids, hard for my husband, hard for me. It spiraled. Eventually, my marriage fell apart. I ended up in Utah with my girls, in Utah in my 30s, while my girls were teenagers. They were 13 and 15. I found heroin to add to my meth and alcohol problem. And within 2 months of starting heroin and using meth and heroin, I had lost my home, my children, my everything. Everything was all over. There was no more pretending that I was somehow holding something together. I was addicted. Heroin was like the magic key to the kingdom in my brain. It numbed me out, and it was like alcohol on steroids. It was so monotone, and I finally didn't care about anything.
Sure.
And so I lost my kids. They went to go live with my sisters, and then I went out on the streets in Salt Lake City, and I literally packed up a backpack and drove my minivan into Salt Lake City, checked into a hotel, and figured out how to prostitute myself off of Backpage. And that is how I lived for the next several years out there in that world.
How old were you at this time when the marriage ends? Kind of that time frame.
That time frame, I was like 34.
Okay.
And then I kind of held it together for a couple of years. Once the divorce happened, I had a couple good years where I was trying to really show up as a single mom, but then it eventually spiraled again. So
sure.
And then it just totally fell apart. So I went from bad to worse, and totally then disconnected from family. And then at this point, I'm like getting up into my late 30s, and this is all my family's ever seen and known of Kelly, right? It's this out of control mental health chaos, in and out of hospitals from cutting, the using, can't be a stable mom. and then now out on the streets, and now she's using heroin, and now she's a prostitute. It is like, at that point, it's pretty shocking. I come from a family who belongs to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Most people know us as Mormons. I was raised pretty religiously, and so this was all very shocking, of course, to them. And they're like, how do we hold out hope for this? They loved me, but it was looking pretty bleak at that point.
So, Kelly,
I was amazed.
Real quick question. We actually have two questions, because those of us down here in the South picture Salt Lake City as being a very cold place. Is it pretty much low temperatures all the time?
It's kind of a desert, but we do get snow in the winter. So it looks a little bit like we have big Rocky Mountains right outside of the window, and we get snow in the winter, but we don't get it like Minnesota.
I got you. Okay, it can be fairly pleasant at times. Okay,
but let's be honest. In Louisiana, we consider anything from like the Arkansas state line north cold. So, I mean, I mowed grass today. It's January 3rd. So,
and Matt wears shorts 365 days.
I do most of the year. Yeah. So.
I would love that.
I guess my second question is, so you mentioned your Mormon faith and Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Is this, like, when we hear on television, would this be what they call LDS?
Yes.
So that's just the short abbreviated form of
Latter-day Saints.
Gotcha. Okay. I wanted to, I didn't know if there was there's, you may be a Baptist or something, but there's offsprings of that. And I didn't know if that was an offspring or if it was just the shortened version of it.
No, we're part of the main Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Here in Utah, there are some offshoots, but they're very small, and they broke off like in the 1800s, back when the church was still practicing polygamy. So you'll see those shows on TV and things like that, and those are not members of our church.
I have friends that are Mormon faith, and we've talked about that quite a bit, and they're like, "Hey, that's not us, bro." Like,
I know.
So
we sometimes have to clear it up for people.
Yeah, no, I get it. I totally get it.
So, for something, and I'm like, no.
It's kind of like us being Baptist down here, and you see those people handling those snakes at church. That ain't us, bro. Like, we don't do that.
Oh, come on, man.
No, I'm out.
No.
If they pull a snake out of church, I'm gone.
I don't know. You were pretty good with that snake in the yard.
Yeah, you saw what I did with it, though. I shot it. So that's it.
We don't wear pilgrim hats, so we just so.
There you go.
So, not to be confused with the Amish.
Right. Yeah.
Isn't most of, or I'm going to get, this is a guess here, but a lot of the Utah population is of that faith. Is that pretty accurate?
Definitely. Here where we live in Utah County, which is this county south of Salt Lake City, this is where the highest concentration of Latter-day Saints is, and I think it's like 60 or 70% of people. So if you can imagine, like, it's pretty much all your neighbors, and we have churches on every corner because there's so many of us. So there's lots of Latter-day Saint chapels on every corner.
Gotcha.
And so in Salt Lake, it's now reached under 50%, but lots of us here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that cleared up a little bit.
One other thing about Utah, this is my contribution.
I've only been to St. George. I've never been anywhere.
To the geography is, I watch Live PD. They have the nicest state troopers, bro. Utah, if you get pulled over, they pull everybody from California over, and they go, "Hey, you're from California, huh?" And they're real nice, and they find like a U-Haul full of weed, in the on the people, but they're really nice up there,
I mean, never to ride through Utah with you, Matt.
Yeah. Yeah. So
they're
anyway,
probably handing a Book of Mormon too on their way to jail.
There you go. There you go.
They are very nice.
So let me tie this in with Weston, Kelly, you're starting the hotel part. Where can you bring us kind of up to that time frame on your journey? As y'all are going along here. If we don't have a lot of couples, so this is kind of interesting to me to how y'all tied into the journey of meeting and sobriety and all those things. Can you kind of start us on your side and kind of run us up to a point there?
Yeah. I'll just kind of give you like a brief summary of like where it kind of started with me, and then kind of tie it into how we came across each other and how we met. Like Kelly says, we had really similar stories. I was raised in a mixed family. I have a brother and a sister. My mother passed away when I was 11 years old from a major heart attack. She was only, I think she was 30 years old. So she was really young. And it was kind of just like a out of the sudden kind of thing. We just unexpected. She had symptoms, and then like 2 or 3 days later, she passed away in her sleep. And so that was really hard as a kid. My dad was an alcoholic. So I grew up in an alcoholic home. I really loved my dad a lot. For a long time, I had a lot of resentments towards my father. What has really been a beautiful thing is through the steps in this program that I've been able to, I'm going to get emotional. Sorry. But,
no, man, you're good.
make an amends with my father, and just to see him the way God sees all of us. Right. And kid, I was in a Latter-day Saint community. We had all my friends were, we all went to church. My dad made sure we go to church, but I was like the one, I was the kid that was bringing the porn mags to all the 7 and 8 year olds, my buddies, and saying, hey, look, look what I got. So, and so I was definitely the kid getting in trouble in our neighborhood, but I just had an addiction, like anything. I had that sensor that went off in my head. That was like everything, like Kelly said, more. I had that kind of same feeling through life was, there was just always that sensor that went off, that dopamine sensor. And so, mine as a young age started with pornography, stealing my dad's porn mags and getting into that and just watching my dad drink. And I think after my mom passed away, that really was a blow to our family, and especially my dad. And I think for my dad, I just, as we all do, as alcoholics, we drink and use drugs to cope with pain. And so my dad's drinking kind of, just continued
maybe
through my childhood.
Yeah,
it did. It worsened. Yep. It worsened. And, my dad just didn't know how to, he was raising us kids, he, got married to an angel. My stepmother, Trudy, she had, three boys and one girl. So we had a mixed family of seven of us in one household. So my dad remarried, and she really, took on that mother role for us as kids, and kind of gave us, that motherly love that, we didn't have at the time. I've been really blessed with really good family. I just really, really good family. And that was kind of, one of the things that I struggled with, when I started getting into my addiction as a young teenager. It was the shame, right? It was that, I've got really good family, but, I felt ashamed that, here I am, this, the black sheep, and I don't want them to know what I'm going through or what I'm struggling with. So I really kept those things secret from my family and hid it from them for a long time. Kind of fast forward, most of my drug use started with, marijuana, mushrooms, LSD, the drinking, and that kind of catapulted all through high school. I love playing baseball. So I was, I played on the high school baseball team for Lehigh, here just north of Spanish Fork. And, I really love baseball a lot, and I think that was one of those things as a kid that I loved playing baseball because it was just something I enjoyed. It was kind of like fishing. Fishing and hunting and baseball kind of just went like hand in hand for me. And so I just spent a lot of time doing that. And I think that was, it was a way to cope with, life. And, but it also was just hard, because, here I am, playing baseball, and, I'd be smoking weed in the parking lot before our bus rides to play a game, and I'd just be stoned out of my mind. Right. And so that was kind of, my life. And, my dad and me and my dad, he grew up in a strict home. My dad was a country boy, and, it's just, you guys probably know that, some of those old timers, they grew up a certain way, and, there was, we had to vacuum, the lines, and the carpet had to be, a certain way.
Sure.
And he was strict, but, my dad always loved, and when he'd get mad or lose his temper, he always came and apologized. And that was one of the things that I noticed about my dad, is he had a really big heart that way. But he just didn't know how to handle his anger and with the drinking, that got worse over time. And so my dad and I, we just butted heads there. As a teenager, teenagers, we want to do what we want to do. And I was getting to that point where, all my friends were here. They were going to dances and they were doing the things they wanted to do, but I couldn't go to football games. And I had to go, I had a bedtime, in high school, I had to be in bed at a certain time. And so it started to stack up on me. And finally, I lost it. And I said, we got in an argument one night and I just, I told him, F you, and I'm going to leave and I'm going to do what I want to do. And, he got up and, punched me in the nose and I left and I took off running and I didn't come back. It was snowing. I remember it was snowing outside and I was kind of cuddled up into this bush and my stepbrother drove down the road and picked me up and, took me down to Wendy's and we got one of those, junior bacon cheeseburgers and a small Frosty and, we talked and so that kind of was just the catapult for me. I decided, I don't want to live here and live by these rules anymore. And I just left. I said, well, you know what? I'm going to figure this life thing on my own. I forgot, like I says, I don't need God. I don't need, I'm going to figure life out on my own and this is going to be my way. And so I got into methamphetamines and heroin at a young age. I was probably 19 years old. Running around with gangs. I share my story and, people don't know I have tattoos, but till I take off my shirt or I'm in church and the church activity and the kids are like, whoa, you got tattoos? And I go, I've got a few. There's a story behind each and one of those tattoos. I don't remember everything that happened. It's kind of, I was pretty numb, but, it just, so that's where I was, my life was just really out of control and, it's unmanageable. The methamphetamine and the heroin, meth in those days was strong, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it sent me for a loop and I, met my ex-wife. We had a similar story to Kelly's. I had 3 children with my ex-wife. I was married and only married for 4 or 5 years and then was divorced. So I couldn't, I'm the kind of drug addict that just I'm all in, and I was doing crazy things and robbing places and doing things that I just would never do sober. And so I'd always find myself in jails. It was like I could stay out for a few months and 2 or 3 months and and then I would end up in jail, and that was kind of the cycle through most of my life, in my addiction and that's where I lost custody of my kids. I was in jail doing some time in jail, and I got a letter from the state saying that I had terminated my rights as a parent because I had been locked up for so long and that I needed to turn my rights over and
how old were you at this time?
So I was probably 24, I bet 24-ish, 25. So super young and here I am in jail and I thought, what, like part of me was like, out there, and then there's like God kind of showing up and saying, maybe it's a good idea that you give your kids a better place to live than what you've offered them. And so, that was a humbling experience for me as, I signed the papers and turned my kids over to the state and they were adopted out. And so, after that happened, I tried, like Kelly, it's like you get, I had periods of sobriety, I would start, I'd have months of sobriety under me. I was being a good dad. I was working a full-time job, and just trying to do this, on my own thing, it's like, well, what was the missing piece? Like I was trying to figure that out.
Did you use jail at this time just to kind of sober you up, which was what a lot of people try to do? Just, hey, I'm clean. I just got out. I did 6 months or whatever, and I'm going to walk the straight and narrow.
Yeah.
That's
exactly. I mean, I spent probably 27 or 28 times in and out of jails in the last, throughout my life. And it might be more than that, but I'm just kind of making a guess. And so were you going to say something?
Yeah.
Oh, you got a funny thing to share.
Well, we went into the Utah County Jail to share our story with some of the inmates there. And as a gift for Weston, they printed out all of his mug shots from over the years and gave it to him like in a flip book.
That's awesome.
I know they start at like when he's like little and 18 and they go all the way through. And I'm like, it's the flip book.
Yeah.
We can laugh about it now, but it's amazing, this stack of mug shots.
My sponsor is a politician here in the parish we live in, and he does all kind of good stuff for all kind of people. But if you Google him, the first picture that comes up is his mugshot from his DUI. And it's like the man has done all kind of stuff for everybody in the world, and that's the first picture you come up on Google. So who knows, But but that's so great. Funny. The mugshot thing, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, it was pretty funny, and so that always is a good way of opening up sharing your story in the jail.
Street cred.
So I think so kind of fast forward, so I can kind of get into the part where I met Kelly. When things get worse, or you think they get worse, they always get worse, and that was kind of like, well, I think I was at my rock bottom, in jail, and there's a part of me too, like I've always known who God was, like I always knew God was there, even as a little kid. Like there was always this feeling that I had of peace, but it was always me that turned my back on God, right? And so, like I'd have these experiences in jail where, like people say, come to Jesus moments, well, I had a lot of come to Jesus moments in jail, and
right.
I'm still like, what?
Yeah.
And so it's funny because people are like, oh, you're just having a come to Jesus moment. And I'm like, yeah, man, come join, it's good. What else you got to do in jail? I mean, you can sit and count the cracks in your jail cell, or smell your celly's feet, or farts. I don't know, but that's just reality. But so it's kind of like God's always been on pursuit of me, and I just for a long time I turned my back on Him, and so kind of fast forward, I got into the worst part of my addiction was with heroin, and so I with the heroin, like it started out mediocre. I could use it every 1 or 2 times a week. Then it started getting worse. So I was like 3 or 4 times, and then it was like every day, and then it was all day. And that's kind of what heroin leads to. And so I did that, and I, turned into a thief, and I was a full-time thief. And I made a living out of it, like it really fed my ego to where, people are like, well, you're the best of the best. And so that really kind of fueled that ego where I just was like, you know what, I am. And I just made it a full-time job, and I did it all day long. And I was going into Home Depot and Lowe's, literally going in and just, and leaving with money. I was, walking out with thousands and thousands of dollars worth of stuff with nobody even knowing. And so that was kind of, where it just got out of control. And I made a living for like 2 or 3 years. Every day of my life, it was going into shopping stores and stealing, and because I couldn't pay for that, my habit, I had to
sure.
I had to pay for it. And so, yeah, I ended up, kind of my breaking point with that breaking point. What happened is I knew, I don't know if you guys, everybody can relate, but you have a time in your life when you're rock bottom and you just know something's going to happen, or, you feel like you're going to get put on handcuffs, or, I had that feeling like more stronger than I ever have. And I was giving somebody a ride one day, and I gave him a ride, and I dropped him off, and I was sitting in the car. I was just so paranoid. I didn't want to go in this house. And And God spoke to me. I had this little voice tell me, you need to leave and just head down to the Maverick gas station. And so I says, well, that's weird. And so I had that feeling again. He's like, you need to leave. And so I left. And as I left, I turned the corner, I cop lights lit me up. And here I am. Like, I looked in my car and, I have just paraphernalia all over in my car. And my car is full of everything I own was in my car because I lived in it. I was living in it for last year of my addiction. And so I just looked down and I just was like, I can't do it anymore. Right. I couldn't do this, fight this. I mean, it wore me out completely, the way I was living my life. And I was at that breaking point. Like, I can't fight anymore. And that's that time, where I'm like, okay, God, like, what do you want me to do now? Like, I give it to you. Like, what do you want me to do? I don't want to fight this anymore. Right. And because I've been fighting for so long that it wore me out, and so, yeah, I just, went to jail and, I thought that was, okay, I'm going to go to jail, right? I'm going to go to jail and I'm going to sit, I can do it. I've done this plenty of times before, like I can get sober in jail, right? Well, that wasn't the plan God had in store for me. He's like, well, the deputy calls me up and they're like, well, you're getting early crowded release. There's no room for you here in jail. I go, oh, well, I have nowhere to go. And they're like, well, you're not staying here. And they literally just like, they're not, and I got my car impounded. I don't have a car and they kicked me out on the streets. And I thought, with no money, I had just barely enough charge on my phone.
Most people would be overjoyed that the jail was kicking them out.
Right.
You sound a little disappointed. Like, yeah, I needed to eat there and,
I needed a hot meal.
Sleep it off. So,
yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was kind of like that, where I thought, okay, well, like that was my rock bottom. So, I mean, I hadn't talked to my family in years and trying to figure out like, where am I going to go? Like, I don't even have anybody to call. And everybody I called that run around with and on the streets didn't answer, and I thought, God's like, you need to call your brother. And that was kind of that breaking point of like surrendering. Like, I called my brother and I says, hey man, I need some help. And so he says, I'll be up there. And he was up there in like 45 minutes, picked me up and got me into treatment. So that's where my life started to change. And I ended up, getting into the rooms of, finding the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's where I got into, finding a community and a fellowship. And I love AA meetings. I mean, I loved it. I love the guys that are throwing the F-bombs and yeah. They're just like, they're real. I mean, it's like,
yeah.
My sponsor tells me, he's like, it's the only place in the world that you can hear the F-bomb and feel the Spirit and feel God and love. And I'm like, it's true. Somebody can go in there and completely belligerent. And I'm like, you know what? I feel the Spirit. It's there.
Yeah.
Right. And that's what I love. And so I was like, this is the solution. This is the solution. God was my solution. And then, the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous was what was going to maintain my sobriety. And that's where I met Sweet Kelly. We met in the 12-step meeting. I invited her. I actually found her on Facebook. I jokingly say it. I Facebook stalked her, but
You did a little.
I did. It was kind of like that, like, who's this guy, and I was like, I passed. She was friends with my sponsor, so I passed the sniff test.
There you go. That's always a good character reference, is the
That's
sponsor.
right.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Kelly, you were so as he went to treatment, and that was the first time you'd ever been to treatment, Weston?
Yeah, that was I had went one time to treatment and ended up AWOL and that was like in my early 20s and that was like the first time that I'd been to treatment and took it serious, and the only time. It was it just did what it did and needed to do to help me. And
so let me ask. So Kelly, we've got to the hotel, moved into the hotel part.
Yeah.
Where are you going from there to kind of tie y'all in?
Yeah.
So
I'll try to sum it up a little bit and not get too stuck in the weeds. I think that's where, for the first time, in that dark place and living that life and dealing with the people out on the street, dealing with the drug dealers and the wannabe pimps and the gangster, it's all it feels a little bit like I always explain it like this. It's like everybody out there is like floating in the dark sea in shark infested waters, and you don't know who's going to OD, and you don't know who's going to prison, and you don't know who's going to get murdered, but we're all just looking at each other and getting picked off one at a time. And so that's what that world felt like to me. But that's in that darkness. And I began to, for the first time, talk to God again. And I didn't mention this before, but Weston lost his mom when he was 11. I lost my dad when I was 15. He died of a heart attack as well.
Okay.
And from that point on, I didn't trust God. I didn't trust the world. I just had my biggest resentment was to God. And I was like, yeah, you're pretty scary. I'm not interested in following your plan. I don't see you as a viable solution, and I definitely don't see you as a loving God. But as I got some perspective out there in the darkness and really witnessing, a lot of people who had the time on methamphetamine can maybe relate to the fact that meth especially can open spiritual doors that are very intense, and it's a demonic attack. And that in particular was something that pushed me toward the light, because I definitely can't deny the fact that I'm experiencing dark spiritual experiences. And if the darkness was real, then maybe the light is real. Maybe there's a good, loving God, because there's clearly an awful side of things. There's clearly dark entities. There has to be good entities. And I'd been taught enough. In my religion, I'd been taught enough about a loving God and an atonement and all of these things that was all still in me. So I began to pray for the willingness to be willing. It was the only thing I had to offer on the altar. I didn't know how to be willing, but I had these conversations over the span of about 2.5 years where I started to tell God, I'll go through whatever it is that you need to put me through in order to make me willing. And I'll live through it and I'll go through it. But I don't know how to create those circumstances, and I certainly don't know what they are. And he did. He did. And where things were really bad, they got worse. And it was sort of my own personal Gethsemane, or my own personal hell. And it was the most terrifying and horrible experiences of my life, but it was exactly what I needed. And it was exactly what I prayed for, so that I could then finally hit a turning point where I was finally, my stubborn ass is finally ready to surrender. It was like the pain of the solution was finally bigger, or the pain of the problem was bigger than the pain of the solution. That tipping point happened where I was like, I was unconditionally willing to do whatever God needed me to do. And,
sure.
And he walked me through some hell. And I look back at that time, and it's difficult to put words to, and it's hard to describe, but it was what I needed. And so from that point, I started to see miracles in my life, as far as the ability to put 24 hours of sobriety together, coming off the streets in miraculous ways. And, the logistics and the PTSD and you don't have a driver's license anymore. Like, you don't have a job, you gotta walk, and all of that stuff all came together. God found a way for the logistics to come together, for people and angels in my life to come together. And through that process of trusting God for the first time and watching him show up and do for me what I absolutely knew I could not do for myself, it was mind-boggling.
I like what you said about angels too. That's so true with everybody. You look back on your journey and you go, how did that person happen to be right there at that moment to move me just another few feet down this journey, you know, and help me out. Oh my God, I've got so many of them, you know.
Well, you do too, and I even have a name for it. I started to call those experiences transcendent synchronicities because I knew those were divine moments, and I began to see it. So I went from like the worst victim mentality ever. I mean, I'm sure it was like I was one of those really exhausting people to be around because everything was everyone's fault, and there was never a solution that was good enough. But I changed, like this paradigm shift happened when I started to believe in and exercise faith in a loving God who loved me, who like thought I was good enough, even though I had a rough past. He was like, you know what? I know who you really are, and I know who you're really meant to be. And now your past is just going to be a story to help other people. Like all of a sudden, this hot mess dumpster fire of a life became like this whole new story. And it was like God was in everything around me. And I mean, it's still mind blowing to me when I sit and think and find out that God was there all along, because I was so determined and that he wasn't, that it wasn't viable, that it wasn't real, that he didn't love me. And the greatest part of being an addict or an alcoholic is that these are the journeys that lead us to our higher power, right? I mean,
sure.
At the end of the day, would I change it? I mean, this difficult, horrible journey led me to my higher power, and then in turn helped me turn into who he wanted me to be, and then led me to like my adorable husband who has been through his own difficult journey and has found God at the end of his struggle.
So I want to interrupt on one thing you said earlier, and I want to follow up with this. Crystal meth was never a big one for me. I had a little run with it back in the early 2000s, and I kind of went on to other things. But you were talking about the spiritual part of that, and this is kind of like the mugshot story, okay? I mean, it's kind of, I had a guy, I wasn't sponsoring him. It was a younger guy, been to treatment several times. Meth was his deal. He got out. He was doing really good, man. Talked to him every day. And I wasn't his sponsor really, but I just one of those guys, you know. And so I was working at a treatment center at the time, and I had met the guy there, and he got out, and, you know, as we do, helped him kind of get a little place, and he's doing his thing. Well, he goes around about 8 or 9 months and he goes off the rails. You know, he's back using. His landlord called me and said, hey, tried to get a hold of him, can't get a hold of him. He's in the house. I can see him, but he won't come out. And my brain immediately went, yeah, he's high. So, you know, I'm like, I'm just going to go by there. And this guy had like a big beard, like the Duck Dynasty guys. He's a young guy, but just covered in hair, you know, that kind of thing. So I roll up like an idiot by myself, and I have no idea what this condition this guy's in. Knock on the door, and he answers the door, eyes wide. He has no shirt on, and he says, man, I've been waiting on you. God told me you were coming. And I said, he did. And I step in the house, right? He says, yeah. He said, I finally had a spiritual experience. And he is so high, like out of his mind high. And I'm not impressed, okay? And I'm like, yeah, you have, huh? And he says, yeah. He said, Jesus has been talking to me. And he sent me a letter that he wrote it to me on my bathroom mirror. And he said, I can read the message if I stand in the mirror. No. He said he wrote it on my chest. And he said, I can read it if I look in the bathroom mirror and read it off my chest. But I've had to shave some of my chest hair to read some of the parts of it. And I'm looking at him, and he said, but he's talking to me. And I said, what did Jesus tell you? That you're being a dumbass? And he said, no, I'm serious. And I went back there and I was like, buddy, there's nothing back there. You know, and we had to call the guys in the white coats, you know, and 2 weeks later, he goes through the mental hospital and he shows up at work again at the treatment center. They're bringing him over there, and he gets out of the van, and I'm standing up on the top of the hill, and I haven't seen him since that day. And he gets out and he looks up at me, he shakes his head, he goes, it wasn't Jesus. I said, yeah, I kind of try to tell you that, brother. But anyway, but he's doing a lot better now, and believes in sober living and all that stuff. But yeah, man, I hear that a lot, you know. But anyway,
that's a good one. That's a good classic right there. Yeah. Well, and for me, that's a lot of that type of stuff. And I really truly believe in that demonic energy that somehow, I don't know what it does to the brain or how exactly it works, but there's definitely spiritual doors that open and manipulation that happens and things like that. And it was through that I began to consider that God was a viable solution. I mean, it's so interesting to think of it that way. Like I was under spiritual demonic attack, but in the end, it sort of backfired on them because all they did was help me believe in things spiritual for the first time. Mm-hmm. And wow, like I don't know how to really put it into words, like the true power, like how real our higher power becomes, a God becomes when I tried my whole life, my willpower to make myself mentally well, to stay sober, to be a good friend, to be a good spouse, to be a good parent, all of those things. I tried to white knuckle my way and change myself. And in the end, it was exercising faith in this concept that I thought was just foolish. And I finally did that with full intent of heart, with all that was in me. And it turned out to actually be, the Easter egg in the room, or it was like, I can't believe it worked,
Right.
It works and it's real. And it is real power. That is the real power that we seek is the power that comes from outside of us, because I don't have it.
And I'm not as up on the spiritual side that you're talking about, but I understand what you're saying. And my thing, the connection with it has always been with drugs and alcohol versus finally admitting there's a higher power and having a relationship with that. What they both offer is that peace of mind. That's the only time I could get settled down, calm down. Hey, I'm not in control. I'm high. There's nothing. Yes. Well, the same thing works with God. I mean, you go, he's in control of this. I just have to do my little part. And that was, to me, as simply as I can put it. And now I fish, like Weston was talking about, I do things like that. That's the same thing to me. But it's healthy, and I've learned to be healthy with that kind of stuff.
Maybe you should be a guide. Maybe you should be a spiritual fishing guide.
I could be, man.
I told Weston that earlier today, by the way.
We
had that same conversation.
I probably wouldn't make a lot of money though, because I'm not that good at fishing.
And he fishes in golf course ponds.
Yeah, and most of mine is trespassing. And if we get caught,
nobody knows who you are, man.
That's the unspiritual side, is illegal fishing.
We read
anonymous.
The anonymous part really helps out right there. We read when we were talking about Jill's journals, and as you'll hear if you listen to the next episode, there is and we agnostics in the book talks about that battle between logic and faith. And sometimes that battle, I got sober when I was 38 years old. Right. And I was raised in a Pentecostal home, pretty hardcore religious. Right. I had a really good belief system in a power greater than myself, but I had a lot of faith in logic, and there was the desired shore of faith, and I'm right there on the edge of it. And I fought this thing from 27 years old until 38. I would go to meetings or go to treatment, but I would get out, and the logical part of my brain just says, none of this makes any sense. Mm-hmm. What does God have to do with my drinking?
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Yep. And when I gave up logic, a whole bunch of really nice things started happening.
And to follow that up exactly, that was my giving up the logic part. Same thing. I grew up in a Baptist church. My dad was a pastor, man. It was, that's the life. And mine was, this logically, this doesn't make sense. But the thing was, I couldn't stop drinking and using for no amount of time. And I finally in a treatment center went, okay, well, if you want to be God, and my arrogance, then show me that. And what he showed me was I stayed clean and sober for a day, and then 2 days, and then 3 days. And then I got a 30-day chip, and I went, ooh, this hadn't happened in 20 years. Like, Something's happening here. And so I got results. Then it was a lot easier as it went along to go, oh, I see what's happening here,
Yes. Yeah. Well, that was exactly my experience. I changed this one variable. It was such evidence to me that I was getting power from God, because the only thing I had changed was I was going to let him do the heavy lifting. I was finally going to exercise faith and try to do the next right thing and try to turn my will over to this God and do. I mean, it was like moment by moment I felt at the beginning, I'm like, okay, what is the next right thing? It took a minute to get that pattern, but I mean, he showed up in like these crazy conspicuous ways. And like you said, it was like, here's the one thing I changed. And then all of a sudden everything changed. Yeah. I certainly couldn't do it. And I know what I'm capable of.
I got the little bit of sobriety, and then I started going to meetings, and I went in, and like y'all talked about earlier, then I'm sitting in a room with a bunch of people, and they're dropping F-bombs, and they're talking about having, been married 12 times, and they've been to jail 30 times. And I'm like, this person looks like the most sane, nicest person I've ever met. Right. Like, how are they telling all this stuff? And I realized they were real, and that they had lived that life, and they still fought things every day, but they had figured out how to fight it pretty good. Yeah. That intrigued me, because it wasn't church where everyone was white as snow. You know what I mean? It kind of was a different angle for me. I went, these are my folks. Like they get what's going on here. That really grew my faith from there too. Being around folks that I could see every day. And you see them come in and they do really great. And then some of them would fall off and they would go back out for a little while and they'd come back in. Yeah. And that to me was as big a thing as the guy that had been sober 40 years, the group as a whole was just like, man, this is what I need to be around,
My very first sponsor was a little old man. He's passed now at this point. And I think he had about 18 years when he picked me up. One of the first things, we have a local treatment center. It's called Brentwood. It's Brentwood Hospital. I call it Brentwood Bed and Breakfast because I went so much. But one of his first stories he told me was he was the only person who had ever escaped from Brentwood. And my first thought process is, how did they not catch you? You're a 100-year-old man. I mean, what did you do to elude the great folk at Brentwood? And of course he had done that back in the 70s or the 80s when he was still a track star. But that kind of that's when I perked up and I was like, this guy might be a rebel just like me.
Yeah.
One of the things that I loved about meetings in early recovery is the chip and a hug. I went so many years without. First of all, I didn't love myself, and and I didn't feel loved. I didn't love other people. I was just terrible, right? And so here I am. I get in this environment, with just a few days or a few weeks sobriety, and here I am getting a chip and a hug from the everybody, and you sit in there and you hear a room full of these old timers and just thanking me. Like I'd get up and share and here I am. I just share a few words, and then you get these old timers that would get up and just instill hope in me, and make me feel like the newcomer is the most important part of the meetings. Like this is why we keep coming back is the newcomer, and I felt like I hadn't felt love like that from a group of people in a long time. And so I think it was like, I want to keep coming back to this. This is the missing link that I've been missing in my life. And that's why I keep going back. And that's why, you see the newcomers and you just put your arms around them and you love them and you say, hey, been there, you're in the right place. And that's the beauty of the program.
We had a young guy the other night. It was actually a couple came in, and me and another guy at the club sat and talked with the younger guy. And I mean, he's throwing up in a trash can while we're talking to him, that kind of level of new, but I said, hey man, look, just keep coming in here. Don't worry about all that stuff don't try to wrap your head around all that stuff. Just keep coming in here. Yeah. And he's like, I don't know if I can make it till tomorrow and not drink. I said, I don't give a shit if you drink. Just come back in here. Just keep doing that. It's gonna, you gotta get a new thing started. It's so much, like you were talking about, Kelly, about the logistics and all the things that have to come together. And it's like, that's so much on somebody trying to also withdraw and detox and live without that, and it's like, just focus on one little thing here that's going to open doors for other things, and try to do that. Yeah, it was too much for me all at once, it was just kind of a progression. But to get back to you guys' story, y'all, Weston's went to rehab, and then Kelly, you're kind of, where are y'all at on this journey, if y'all want to take it from there? And
well, I can tell, I was about 4.5 years sober when we met, right?
Okay.
4.5 years. And he was only barely hitting like 2 years sober.
2 years sober.
Our church did a little movie. If people go on YouTube and look at Am I Beyond Saving, there's a little 6-minute video they did about my story. And Weston came across that little video, and then he figured, I bet she lives in Utah. So he looked me up on Facebook and started to kind of reach out to me. And I'm like, who is this guy? I don't even know.
He's creative,
Really cute, but I was like, it's so weird. Like, I don't know him. And he's like, oh, but I saw your video. And I was like, okay, well, that's nice, But he eventually sent an audio of a podcast he had been on. And eventually I opened it up and listened to it and listened to his story. And as I was listening to his story, and we had never talked on the phone, we'd never met, I'm having this really weird experience where I'm like, it feels like I already know this person. It's so strange to listen to him. And so he did eventually invite me to come out to his meeting. Once I met him and heard him share in the meeting, I was sold. I was like, oh, this is my guy. And I think he was sold too. He's like, oh, this is my woman. Like,
yeah.
We knew it. We stayed friends. Like, we were chill. And, and we stayed friends for 5 months. And he finally asked me out. And I really liked that too. Like, there wasn't anything that needed to happen or rush into. Like, we were willing to get to know each other and be friends and have good talks. And there wasn't any dating pressure. And it was just healthy. Like, for the first time we were doing this healthy thing, and then, we were engaged pretty soon after starting to date and then got married. And it's been so fun. As soon as we were married, we put our missionary papers in. So we serve as LDS missionaries. We also wear the tags, the little black tags you see the little elders wearing when they're walking around town, if you ever see them in the South. But we wear tags, and we group lead 12-step meetings in our church. So the LDS church, connected with AA and got permission to create its own 12-step program. And so we love traditional AA because we feel like we get a lot out of it, but we also love leading our meetings where we get to talk about the steps in the language of the gospel. And so I think serving together has been probably some of our greatest joy. And being part of those meetings, and it's just amazing. We love it.
That is amazing. Yeah. A lot of faiths, and I can only speak for the one that I have experience with, but in that particular faith, in a certain time period, coming forward and saying I'm an alcoholic was almost a stigma in itself.
Yes.
Yeah. And then to be able to start a group and say, hey, there's actually more than just me, guys.
Yeah.
That's right.
So
this is a big thing for Weston and I. We really believe in breaking down that stigma in this community. So we often do public speaking. We'll speak at the pulpit as many times as they'll give us the opportunity to share about the program, and to share our story, because we know that there are people who silently suffer because of that stigma and are afraid to come forward, or afraid, or don't know where to find the help. And in our community, where it can be, that I think in any community there's that, especially a religious community, you have this sort of, you put your best foot forward and you don't tell people what's really going on. But we believe in breaking down those walls. And Weston and I in this community, we take every opportunity to do that, because we want to open the conversation. We want people to bust through that shame and be willing to come show up at a meeting and get some help. So.
Yeah, and I think all of us that have been sober a little while relate to that for sure. And I think anybody that has any kind of sobriety, and not that it always has to be public. There's a lot of people that keep it very private unless they know specifically, hey, I have this person approach me about needing help or whatever it might be. And I think that's a pretty cool deal when you see folks just giving back what they got 100-fold. How is the AA and recovery community in Salt Lake? What's population of Salt Lake?
Where you at? They're south of Salt Lake.
Okay, you're south. Okay, is it a lot of meetings there? Is it pretty good?
Yeah. We've got a lot of meetings out here.
There's NA, there's AA, there's CA. CMA, there's so many. There's a meeting for any kind of addiction, and
we have Alano clubs and things like that around.
Gotcha.
So,
Gotcha.
There's quite a community. It's great.
Sounds about like it is here, and where we're at is actually a relatively small community. And I live in Dallas, Texas, and you would think that there would be just AA on every corner, but believe it or not, we have probably here in this small community, we have more AA than they have over there per capita.
Really?
Wow. Yeah.
It's weird.
That's surprising.
I went to rehab up in the corner of Mississippi, Tennessee, and Alabama. There's nothing up there except Tupelo, Mississippi, where Elvis was born. But the narcotics,
had to throw that in there, didn't you?
Huh? Yeah. But the Narcotics Anonymous, they took us to those meetings while I was in treatment. It'd take us in the van. They have a huge NA community up there, and it's in the middle of nowhere. And there's a meeting every night of the week, and there's 2 on some nights, and they have them during the day and the night. And it's crazy, and you wouldn't think that, but by population, but yeah, it was pretty cool. We are very fortunate here. We've got, and then we have the CR stuff, and I have a good friend that's been clean a long time, and he's a CR guy, and he said, man, we go out to eat and we do this and that. And I'm like, dang, I need to come over there and check that out, But he loves it. Lacey's not here, but she loves CR as well. She'll go to those and AA, and she kind of got started in CR, and that's kind of our version of the religious part of it here.
The religious part.
Yeah. And boy, it does really good, and we have a good community of that too.
That's so great.
But so how is life today? Y'all meet you meet at a Weston was starstruck. You're a YouTube sensation. So take us through the last part of that.
So that was I was starstruck, and her niece was with her too, and so she'd tell the story that like I was probably drooling. I drooling and bugging out Bunny or Roger Rabbit, and so so we just like Kelly said, we hit it off, and we just we didn't take long, and we were married, and we were sealed in the temple, and we just totally turned our lives over to God. Everything we do is to help the other fellow addicts and just give back to God. It's that 12th step is like, we share this message with everybody, and we've been so blessed in the last 3 years that that's the least that we could do. We our hands are in everything, and that's been the blessing is being able to sponsor people, and I had a conversation. It was kind of funny with my sponsor the other day, and I asked him, I says, well, how many sponsors do you sponsor? And he's like, that's a kind of a funny question, but he's like, I don't know. I've got about 100 and something. I said, 100 and something. He's like, 100 and something that, asked me to be their sponsor. And then he's like, I probably really only, there's probably only a handful that actually
5.
Right?
Yeah.
I'm right there with him. I still consider myself these guys' sponsor if they ever want to come back.
Sure.
They ever want to come back.
Exactly. And so that's the kind of the thing is like we just kind of immerse ourselves in it, right? It's,
and like life's still life. We're still either learning how to live day to day and working our own program, and we still have when you've lived a life like ours, there's a lot of damaged relationships and things that take a lot of time to heal. But we're witnessing a lot of miracles, I would say, in those relationships around us. My daughter, my 25-year-old daughter, that, you know, we've reconnected recently, and she lives with us now. And so it's fun to rebuild a relationship with her and see those things. I mean, those are the things that I just go, oh my gosh, you know, like the family relationships and being able to have deep friendships and being able to like be consistent in things or be somebody that people call and want to know what you think about something, or like that's the magic of life, I think is that. Cool. And yeah, it's cool. Next April, I'm actually graduating from college. So that's like another mind-blowing thing.
Yeah.
I dropped out in 9th grade and got my GED eventually. And so to finally be able to like, from being somebody who, you know, was, you know, reading Jesus messages through the bathroom mirror to now, you know, my functions well enough. Yeah.
Hey, let me throw this in too, by the way. Sure. He also had cooked some ground deer meat in a bowl in the microwave and was eating it with his fingers on the bathroom counter. I left that part out, and I was like, really, the deer meat? Like, of all the Jesus messages, you're just eating it with your hands.
I still do that.
Well, Mike's been sober 12 years.
13.
That's so funny.
Oh man, look, I love it though, and I'm glad that he got through that, you know, and we're not a bunch of thin-skinned, you know, we like to laugh and joke, and there's so funny stuff that happens that you know, he's okay now and all that good stuff. But
so what town are y'all in?
We're in Spanish Fork.
Spanish.
Yep, we're in Spanish. Spanish Fork is super small.
Well, it used to be super small. It's growing. Yeah. So yeah, this whole area in Utah County is growing crazy.
So let me ask you this: you go to college, and we talked on the phone previously, Kelly, and you wrote a book. Do you want to talk about that and kind of put that out there so folks can order that or hear it? And I don't know if we can do a link later with it or something like that.
Oh yeah.
But
you can find it on Amazon. It's called Between Monsters and Mercy.
Gotcha.
And it's just my memoir. I wrote it when I was about a year sober. It was kind of during, you know, I had a little bit of a lull in time and felt this impression that I should just record my story while it was all still so fresh. So it's just my story. It's about a 4-hour read, and it's done really well. I've gotten really good reviews, and so people enjoy reading it. Whether, you know, I do tie in sort of my religious experience too to that. So, but you know, if anyone's open-minded and doesn't mind hearing about my higher power or just my experience, you know, it's just my story. And so, yeah, so it can be found on Amazon, Between Monsters and Mercy. And my name while I wrote it was Kelly Thompson.
Gotcha.
So.
Okay.
I'm a reader. I'll read it.
Yeah. I actually ordered me and Jill a copy, and I didn't even think to order Mike one.
I'll read it to you, Matt.
Yeah, I was going to say I can't read, so if I could just kind of lay in your lap and you could read me a bedtime story.
Whenever I tuck you in at night.
Yeah.
They live right on the edge of what looks like Utah Lake.
Okay.
Yeah.
It seems to be a really big lake.
It's
a big lake, and it's I think the max depth is only like 10 or 15 feet.
Yeah, it's like Pontchartrain. Lake Pontchartrain's about like that too. Down
stinky
and mosquitoes.
No, that's my kind of place.
You only think it's stinky till Matt gets there.
Yeah. That's all I know how to fish. I don't fish that clear stuff, you know. So
right by Provo.
Okay.
Yeah.
BYU is. Most people
Provo's
know
just
Provo
north of
for
here.
BYU.
Okay,
Yeah,
gotcha.
Yeah, Matt knows I'm a diehard Cougar fan, so that's BYU is out of Provo. That's where their stadium is, and kind of funny. I have a funny story to go along with the BYU. It was kind of I was going to court, and I was in treatment, and I had a warrant. I was super nervous. I thought, okay, I'm going to go to jail. And this lady's like, you're not going to jail. You're in treatment. You're going to be okay. And then I'm like standing up there with my attorney, and he's like reading this like document, and he starts to chuckle, and I'm like, what's so funny? I'm like, what's, and he's like, they got you. I'm reading in here. They got you pegged as the BYU Bandit at Home Depot. And so,
Oh boy.
That's what they called him because he was always, of course, sporting his BYU gear.
I mean,
so
I
he's
was-
the BYU Bandit.
You're kind of like the wet bandits on Home Alone. You left the sink running every time. You know, they're on to you.
The BYU.
Exactly. Yeah. And so, like, the guy's like, I have never, and he's like, are you a fan? And I'm like, through and through, I've been a diehard my whole life. And we chuckled, and that, I mean, that was kind of the thing. And they, you know, the BYU Bandit. I just thought, well, you know, my thought was they'll never suspect me, you know, going in and stealing stuff if I'm wearing.
Like a returned missionary who's going to,
That's like all my
BYU.
buddies used to drive around, my pothead buddies in high school, and they would put DARE stickers on their cars, you know,
Yeah.
so the police wouldn't pull them over. And I'm like, that doesn't matter when smoke is just rolling out your windows, you know, they don't care. Yeah, you're not fooling nobody. So it's, you know, it's, I have one other area I wanted to get to, and Lacey and I, you know, I was married to someone for 23 years. Both in addiction, both got out of addiction, ended up divorcing. It wasn't, you know, it was just too much under the bridge there and kind of two different journeys. So Lacey and I met, and it's fascinating to us that people in recovery meet and they have learning to coexist. And Weston may have something that's from a previous thing that has nothing to do with Kelly, but it feeds into it because you're together, you know, and how do y'all kind of deal with those things as they come up, and have you, you know, what is your process on that kind of stuff?
Well, I'll say this. I'll say, first of all, I think I don't know if it's luck or a God thing or both, but, you know, we have a really good personality mesh. So there isn't a lot. He is very easygoing and go with the flow, where I might be one, you know, with some ups and downs. So like we gel really well personality wise. So to be honest, some of that just is good because our personalities mesh well. But also, you know, he works his program. He's got his sponsor, and he does his own stuff. And then me too. Like I take care of my thing. I have my sponsor. I do my step work, and I think also we've decided to put God first before even our relationship. So our relationship with God is number one. And so that has given us a really good foundation.
Sure.
So,
and I think too, like another thing, like putting God first, and like she said, like having our sponsors. And I think that's what's really important about having a sponsor, because they're somebody we can go to. And I my sponsor will tell me all the time, he says, what does your higher power? I asked him, what does your higher power say? And then I says, well, God says this. And he goes, okay, what does your other higher power say? And I says, wait a minute, is this a trick question? I'm like, I thought I only had one higher power. He's like, no, your wife. What does your wife say too? And I'm like, oh, she says, he's like, okay, well, you got two answers right there. I think you're good. So it's a good reminder. Like, it just keeps me on the straight, you know, because I know what I'm left on my own devices.
Lacey and our signal to each other is, hey, have you talked to your sponsor lately? And when we say that, we already know you're getting on my dang nerves, okay? You know, and she says that to me. We have not gotten married yet. We're engaged. We're and that's why I'm kind of curious about that, because and I don't want to tell her story, but she's told it on here, and she's had some trauma and a lot of things in her background that she deals with that doesn't really have anything to do with me, and so I'm trying to learn how to help her with that, you know, from my end, you know, and then I just get on her nerves on my end of it. It's just a normal everyday thing. That's what I do. You know, Michael vouched for me. He's nodding his head. I get on his nerves. So
we spend about 2 hours a week together.
Yeah, it is. He's, you know, it's too much for him. It's too much. But you know, it's funny being in recovery, and you have that mindset of like, I love and I care for this person, and I want to have a future with them. So I don't want to cause them, you know, if some of my behavior somehow trips something with them. So it's been a lot of things there it's interesting to me to, you know, and sometimes she'll say, you know, and she's a counselor, and she'll give me these big words, and I have so-and-so, and I'll go in there on YouTube and look it up, you know, and I'll come back, well, here's what I think we should do, you know, and it's some guy on YouTube just told me. So, But anyway, hey, you guys are awesome coming on here. This has been great. You know, I love, and Mike does too, and Jill's under the weather, but we love hearing, and it's so funny. It doesn't matter where you go. The end result when we go in and we do these things that we've all been talking about, we end up with that good result. Sometimes the journeys are different getting there, but it's always the same result.
Well, and that's the beauty of what I've learned through recovery and through working the steps. Like, you know, it's beautiful to see what God can mend and God can fix. I mean, like my dad passed away 3 years ago from alcohol. My dad never could, I talked with him and that's how bad the disease is, you know, it kills, you know, and
sure.
But, you know, the beautiful thing was that, you know, we were able to make an amends and, you know, I was able to take my dad fishing and on one of his last fishing trips, and we had a good time. The wind was blowing like 40 miles an hour. We couldn't get our bait in the water, and we laughed, and it was just those experiences. But, you know, he was able to see his son get clean and sober. And you know, one of the most, and I'll just share this last thing that was humbling. And when I was in treatment, my dad had showed up to treatment, and he was, I could tell he was shaken because he hadn't had any alcohol. But he wanted to show up there clean and sober, and you know, I'll never forget that. Like his eyes would get teary-eyed, and his shakes got really bad. But he sat through that visit for like an hour, and until he got real antsy and he had to go. But you know, it's you know, God has been so good to me and so good to us, and He truly does fix. He does all the heavy lifting. He does all the fixing. You know, we can't do anything. I can't do it, but God can, and that's the beauty of this program and of beauty of AA.
And I'd just say to anybody out there who is even having a hard time imagining what it would be like to be sober, right? It is really, truly, it can be done one day at a time, and that there really is hope. That if you feel somehow like you're uniquely broken, so did the rest of us.
Yeah.
But the truth is that the principles of this program, they work. And if we apply them, we get better. And we get better in ways that we can't even imagine at the beginning. But our souls can heal, and life can open up, and light can pour in. And so for anyone just feeling lost in that darkness, I felt that darkness and lived in that darkness for so long, but I live in light now. I live in light now and hope. And that is possible for anyone. If it was possible for me, it's possible for anyone who is listening to my voice.
That's awesome.
Awesome.
Yep. Guys, thank y'all so much for coming on.
Thank you. You guys are the best.
Hey,
you guys were so great.
If you will, we'll talk later, and I want to get a link for your book and anything that y'all have that if we can help you promote that. And like I said, we're gonna get copies of it, and I think that's great. And
this episode will air on the 12th.
On the 12th, okay.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, it gives me a plenty of time to get the editing process done. So we'll have you guys on the show on the 12th.
Cool.
And hopefully have you back on again, because Lacey is upset that she wasn't able to be here. She wanted to be here for this one.
Tell
And
her we said hi.
I will. And
we would love to come back on. We got so many stories in recovery. I mean, we could go on for days.
Well, the thing with this is crazy that God does things, and I was in a treatment center in Mississippi almost 7 years ago. Never in my wildest idea would I ever think I would have a microphone and headphones 7 years later and talking about this. I thought I might be in jail. You know, I thought that would be that was a good possibility at the time.
Somebody from Dateline interviewing you.
Yeah, be an interview by how did you get in this house? You know, that kind of thing. But you know, if you see that dude, you better get out of there quick. Don't even talk to that guy. You know, Chris Hansen, that's a whole other deal. But you know, it's funny the journey of doing this kind of stuff to go along, and like you said, you never know who it's going to reach, who's going to need to hear it or whatever it might be. Yeah. But the thing is, if you watch the progression of this channel and what we're doing, we do have people on and we do update their lives, and we want people to see that not only did they get clean and sober, they truly recovered, and they went on and they did things. And we had Dickie on the other day. She's gone back to college, getting her degree. All kind of people are doing all kind of cool stuff, and it's possible. So we definitely want y'all to come back on.
Okay, awesome.
We would love that. We would love that.
Awesome.
Thank you guys for coming on, and y'all have a good evening.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, you guys.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
It's a good show, man. What'd you think?
I thought it was really good.
I thought it was really good, too. Always a joy to have people who have gone through the struggles and are still sober, and they can tell an amazing story. Heck, even write a book about it, you know? Utah, of all places, Utah.
Yeah.
What a beautiful state. I've told Elliot a couple times the most beautiful state I've ever been to, and I've been to all of them, is Utah. So
that's I want to go out there and see Idaho, Utah, all that out west area.
you got some amazing stuff, man.
Washington State.
And obviously some amazing people.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's what's so funny, man. Instagram is a great thing, Facebook, all that, when it's used correctly, and it can be used bad and like anything else. But he's a big college football guy, BYU, and he puts a lot of stuff about that on there. And mine is a sobriety. I put that I'm sober on the page, and people, that's the two things I notice about the guy. He or three. He fishes and hunts, college football, and he's sober. That's my kind of dude. So we hit it off right off the bat, and been chatting back and forth for a while. So, but anyway, good stuff.
Well, that ought to wrap up another episode. So, anything you got to add?
Man, I think we covered it.
All right. So we've been at Rule 62 Studio. We've been in Bossier City, Louisiana. And as always, we are the Grouch and the Brainstorm.